Welcome back for the concluding session of our Joni Mitchell Symposium. My name is Dan Levitin. I'm a professor here in the Departments of Music and Psychology, and I'm pleased to be able to host this roundtable discussion. When I was 10 years old, I remember going to summer camp, as many 10-year-olds did, and we sang songs around the campfire. We sang typical campfire songs like Kumbaya and Michael Row Your Boat Ashore and the Circle Game. And a few years later, the very first record that I ever bought with my own allowance money was an album by Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young that had a song that everybody in my age group couldn't get enough of, called Woodstock. And I can say that I knew Joni Mitchell songs before I knew who Joni Mitchell was. They were so much a part of my life and my culture, it was as though they had always been there. Later, when I became, after a time, I became a record producer, and I had an opportunity to meet a number of musicians and artists, all of whom hold Joni's music in very, very high esteem. One of the things that I think is important to note is that very early on, Joni Mitchell started breaking all of the rules and stretching all of the boundaries of the form that we know as pop music. Dean McLean said this morning that she's iconoclastic. To me, an iconoclast is somebody who does just that. They break boundaries. They do not accept traditions. She early on broke with the ABAB pop form. She broke with the idea of using traditional triadic chords or even using traditional harmonies. She pushed the boundaries of musical expression and added to it a lyrical poetry that was at once both personal and universal. In the symposium that we have this afternoon, our first speaker is Greg Tate. Greg Tate's books include Flyboy in the Buttermilk, Essays on American Culture, 1981 to 1993, Everything But the Burden, What White People Are Taking from Black Culture, Midnight Lightning, Jimi Hendrix and the Black Experience. His writing has appeared in The Village Voice, The New York Times, The Washington Post, Art Forum, and Rolling Stone. He also leads Burnt Sugar, the orchestra chamber, and the 14-member Post Bitches Brew Ensemble, who practice conduction, the Butch Morris system of 26 hand and baton gestures for the spontaneous orchestration of improvised music. He is currently developing a news website for the hip-hop band The Roots, which he intends to be the Al Jazeera of hip-hop journalism. Please join me in welcoming one of the great hip-hop journalists, Greg Tate.
If the question is how black is Joni Mitchell, I say, so black that ever since I was a teenager, black people have randomly brought her up in conversation without prompting and without qualifiers or equivocation. Never as a guilty pleasure, never as that white girl Joni Mitchell I like, but as the Joni attached to their beloved Hejera Blue, Court and Spark, Turbulent Indigo, The Hissing of Summer Lawns, Wild Horses, etc., etc. So black that when I was 17, attending the Barry New School, a Washington, D.C. academy then modeled on B.F. Skinner's aggressive ideas about early childhood behavior modification, it was my boy Kenny Washington from across the street who pulled me down into his basement lair to extol the virtues of blue, to gossip about guitar playing Brady's effect on girls in the club, and how Gil Scott-Heron, his other favorite poet, trooped around Chocolate City with a duffel bag full of pillbox pharmaceuticals. So black that after Mingus, she became the only woman other than Billy, Nina, and Aretha deemed worthy of a place in my brother Salim's massive, immaculate, and heavily pro-black male collection of African-American classical music. So black, I've come to believe that Miles, who surely had an out-of-the-body experience when Andy Warhol showed up as his inner white man, saw in her his outer feminine self, a close encounter within others kind of blue. So black that Lisa and Renee still talk about how Court and Spark got them through 4 years of Yale. Lisa being the screenwriting daughter of Amiri Baraka, Renee being the public defender from South Central LA, whose own sister Lisa was once a member of the Crips female division, the Criplets. So black that she first moved to Detroit in pursuit of her muse and not Bleecker Street. So black that she, as much as the unholy trinity, Miles, Jimmy, and Sly, is the tie that binds Prince, Seal, Cassandra Wilson, Joan Armatrading, Terrence Trent D'Arby, Michelle Ndegeocello, David Ryan Harris, Macy Gray, Caetano Veloso, Al Jarreau, Janet Jackson, Terry Collier, Brandon Ross, and Brian Blade. So black that we need consider her the Gnostic Mary Magdalene of Afro-Bohemia's post-soul culture. So black, so black that unlike Clapton or the Stones say she's never had to work for our love. So black folk hear her as an inventor and not a vulture. So black that James Marshall Hendricks always used to bring his reel-to-reel tape recorders to the front row of her shows. So black that Brian Blade spent years wild and free riding around Louisiana with Hejira hitched to his hoopties boombox. So black that she knew nobody would get mad if she said John Coltrane sounded like he could have used some Valium. Black enough. Black enough to still be buck proud of dance contests she won in her teens. Black enough to say Neil Young might rock, but he ain't never rolled. Black enough to rhapsodize sex, race, and death and ill-fated affairs of the heart and have the world pay for the privilege of listening. So black that when she turned up as a black man on the cover of Don Juan's Reckless Daughter, I thought Brujo and not minstrel show. So black that even as a rock star, she gets read as an outsider artist. So black that for most of the 80s and 90s, Craig Street and I could only half joke how the only people we knew who liked Joni Mitchell were black people. So black that she believes 9ths, 11ths, and 13ths are as radio-friendly as the pentatonic scale. So black that her phrasing, like Wayne Shorter's, brings to mind Malian praise singers, sounding meticulously composed and unpredictably fugitive, confessional, declensional, and whimsical. So black that on Herbie Hancock's Gershwin album, she sounds more like the Lady Day of Lady in Satin than the Ladies of the Canyon. So black that she gets as much screen time as Stanley Crouch and Miles' ex-wife Betty Davis in a new documentary on the Electric Miles. So black that she's finally getting honorary degrees in her native land after what, 4 decades in the game? But I digress. And that's all I wrote. Oh. Well, stay here or come back.
We could take some questions on the topic of Joni Mitchell's blackness. If anybody has any questions, there's an audience microphone here.
Okay.
This is great. I wish the principal would just give me permission to bag my citation tonight and have you read that.
Oh man, thank you.
On the topic of this award being long overdue, I was on the selection committee in 2002 for the Grammy Awards, and I had nominated Joni Mitchell for a Lifetime Achievement Award. And the bunch of stuffy old shirts around the table said, well, we give Lifetime Achievement Awards to people like Les Paul and Thomas Alva Edison, and mostly people who are either at the end of their career or dead. And then somebody around the table said, but shouldn't the Lifetime Achievement Award actually be for the amount of achievement? And when that was said, a famous producer who shall remain nameless said, well, if that's the case, a Lifetime Achievement Award for Joni Mitchell is long overdue. Questions about black culture and Joni Mitchell and white culture and...
Can you talk a little bit about, it's so weird to say Joni Mitchell as a third person when she's sitting right there, but Joni Mitchell's musical relationship with Prince, and Prince's musical relationship with Joni Mitchell?
Yeah, well, I think that it's interesting because the first time it turns up is in this fake news copy on the back of the Controversy album. It's like, it's just Joni, but it's Joni, and I don't, I think that everybody I know who was drawn to your music, I think was drawn in by everything at once. It was the melody and the swing, and then it's those lyrics. And I think that, somebody was asking me why did I think so many black people were drawn to her work, and I think it's because I think all of us have a kind of narcissistic inner voice that's going on about our lives and romances and the effect they have on us, but we don't feel free to kind of let that voice out, and that voice is in your music. It's very liberating. It gives, I think, a lot of people, I think, a sense of license to be personal and confessional in a way that's not maudlin, that really is about kind of transforming that, that feeling into lyricism or into rhapsody. Yeah.
Okay, to begin again, when Mingus sent for me, he had Lou Gehrig's disease and he was dying, and he got an idea to do a project with me. And the first one I rejected, it was kind of intellectual actually. And then he set up another one. He wrote 6 melodies, and he flattered me into it. Named it Joni 1, Joni 2, sent for me. So I got intrigued, and we went out there, and then he said to me, the first thing he said to me was, "Well, you that skinny ass folk singer." And then he went, "The strings on Paprika Plains are out of tune." And I said, "Can you hear that? Because nobody could hear it." No, so I'm going to remix it actually, now for the next release, but just kind of straighten it out a bit. But getting down to Mingus, I've digressed. And where was I going? Why didn't you get Jon Hendricks to do this? He had all these melodies, and he wanted words parquet. And as far as bebop writers go, I was a big fan of Jon Hendricks. Had him in high school. He said, "I did, and check this out. What do you think?" And he played "Goodbye Pork Pie Hat" with a Hendricks text, and said, what do you think?" I said, "It's maudlin. That's exactly what, And he said, "Yeah, isn't it? The poor black guy this and the poor black guy that." He said, "Lester was the sweetest guy." And then he just sailed me with all these stories of Lester Young, and then I kind of had to wait for magic to happen, in order to get the libretto on that, and it did come through. I had to wait for street events, because I tend to transcribe what goes down in front of my eyes, so I got lucky on it. But it's interesting you should bring up that particular word, in the Ifa religion, there's a song that they sing in Nigeria, and it's, "Give us the strength of the old black slave women so that we can turn tragedy into genius." So that's deep in the Nigerian roots of it all.
Yeah.
Time for more questions for Greg Tate. Why don't we move on then with the next speaker, and we'll come back around, unless you have a concluding remark.
Oh, no.